He positioned himself between an unknown child and a catastrophic blast, then awoke to find an entire legion prostrated. Before we delve into this narrative, please offer a quick greeting in the comments and indicate your viewing location. This significantly aids in supporting the channel. The metallic arteries of the Vexorian vessel vibrated with the dying thrum of failing systems, a symphony of destruction. Fragments of ruptured conduits showered down like sparks as pandemonium unfurled across every deck. Ethan Cole, a humble technician assigned to the diplomatic envoy ship, navigated the smoke-choked passageways, his once bright yellow safety vest now tattered and darkened by soot. What was meant to be a routine maintenance detail had devolved into a horrific ordeal when radical elements from both human and Vexorian populations instigated the destruction of the delicate peace negotiations. The Vexorians hailed from an ancient lineage of warriors, their dominion encompassing 12 star systems, their martial traditions stretching back through countless ages. They stood at an imposing height of nearly 8 feet, their broad shoulders adorned with shimmering scales that shifted through hues of deep violet to midnight blue, reflecting their internal emotional states. Their visages were sharp and severe, dominated by large golden eyes capable of perceiving a vast spectrum of light. For generations, they had held undisputed sway in this sector of the galaxy until the advent of humanity, with their advanced, faster-than-light propulsion and their unyielding refusal to yield to Vexorian supremacy. The ensuing Cold War had endured for 15 years, marked by sporadic skirmishes and tense diplomatic standoffs, until both parties finally agreed to convene aboard this neutral vessel to broker terms for cooperation. Ethan had never aspired to be a participant in historical events. He was simply a mechanic, adept with his hands and far more comfortable with machinery than with people. When the diplomatic corps issued a call for technical personnel to support the peace summit, he had volunteered primarily because the remuneration was triple his usual compensation, enabling him to send more funds home to his sister and her children. Now, he found himself gasping for air amidst choking fumes, his toolkit lost somewhere 3 decks below, contemplating whether he would ever witness Earth again. The cataclysm that initiated this entire chain of events had originated in the engineering bay, a deliberate act designed to propagate through the ship's power infrastructure. Emergency bulkheads had slammed shut, sealing off numerous sections and trapping personnel in isolated pockets throughout the vessel. Ethan had been engaged in repairing a troublesome air circulation system when the detonation occurred, hurling him against a bulkhead and deafening him with the piercing wail of emergency alarms. Upon regaining consciousness, he discovered himself cut off from the designated evacuation routes. With fires consuming the maintenance corridors and the ship's artificial gravity fluctuating erratically, he proceeded with caution through the wreckage, his breathing ragged in the intensifying smoke. The emergency lighting cast a hellish crimson glow upon everything. Somewhere ahead, he could discern the distinctive cadence of Vexorian combat armor, the heavy tread of soldiers maneuvering through the chaos. He pressed himself against the bulkhead, uncertain whether they were friendly forces or part of the extremist faction responsible for this catastrophe. The armor passed by without detecting him, and he waited until the sound receded before continuing his perilous journey. Then, he heard it, a sound that sent a chill through his very core, a child weeping. Ethan froze, straining to listen. The sound emanated from somewhere ahead, down a side passage leading towards the diplomatic chambers. He knew that several Vexorian families had been invited to the summit, a gesture intended to signify trust and a commitment to peace. The presence of civilians, particularly children, was meant to compel both sides to exercise greater caution and invest more earnestly in the success of the negotiations. Now, those very families were imperiled aboard a burning vessel. The crying grew louder as he approached, and he could detect the raw terror in those small, plaintive sounds. Every instinct urged him to seek out an escape pod, to abandon this dying ship while he still had the chance. But his feet continued to propel him forward, drawn by that forlorn cry of fear and helplessness. He rounded a corner and stopped abruptly. A Vexorian child sat huddled against the bulkhead, likely no more than 6 years of age by human reckoning. Her scales were a lighter shade of purple than those of the adults, appearing almost lavender in the dim emergency lighting. She wore a small, ornate robe that was now torn and stained with ash. Her golden eyes were wide with terror, tears carving paths down her angular face. Behind her, the corridor terminated at a sealed emergency bulkhead, and to her left, a fierce fire raged where a power conduit had ruptured completely. It was then Ethan perceived the source of his profound dread. Wedged against the bulkhead, sparking and hissing with barely contained energy, was a plasma charge. He recognized it instantly from his technical training. It was military-grade ordnance, likely planted by the saboteurs to inflict maximum damage upon this section. The casing was fractured, its safety protocols compromised. The charge was poised to detonate, and imminently. When it did, it would vaporize everything within 30 meters and create a catastrophic breach, venting this entire section into the vacuum of space. The child observed him and emitted a small sound of alarm, pressing herself further against the wall. To her, Ethan was one of the others, one of the humans her people had been conditioned to fear and distrust. He raised his hands slowly, adopting a posture of complete non-aggression. He addressed her, maintaining a calm and gentle tone despite the frantic pounding of his heart. "I am not going to harm you," he reassured her. "I am here to assist." The child offered no reply. She was unable to reply. It was highly improbable she understood any human languages, but she watched him with those enormous golden eyes as he advanced cautiously. The plasma charge emitted a sharp crack, and a fresh cascade of sparks erupted from its damaged housing. Ethan estimated he had perhaps 2 minutes before detonation, possibly less. He needed to extricate the child to safety, but the fire obstructed the sole alternative passage, and the bulkhead behind her was sealed shut. There were no other egress points, no convenient ventilation shafts or access panels. He moved to the bulkhead and attempted the manual override, but the mechanism had fused, likely damaged by the initial explosion that had sealed it. They were trapped, and the countdown was relentlessly ticking. The charge crackled again, more audibly this time. The child whimpered and drew her knees tightly to her chest. Ethan observed her, then the charge, then her again. His mind raced through calculations, angles, and blast radii. If the charge detonated, the force would propagate outward in all directions. The bulkhead would absorb some of it, reflecting the blast back into the corridor. The fire would channel it forward. The child was positioned almost directly in the path of maximum destructive potential. However, if something were placed between her and the impact, something to absorb and deflect that initial wave of superheated plasma, she might survive. The bulkhead behind her might withstand the pressure long enough for rescue teams to breach it. It was not a substantial chance, barely a chance at all. But it was something. Ethan had never considered himself particularly courageous. He had never served in the military, nor fought in any of the skirmishes that occurred along the borders between humans and Vexorans. He repaired climate control units and resealed hull breaches. He enjoyed classic films, spicy cuisine, and video games. He had a sister who depended on him, nephews who affectionately called him Uncle E and eagerly asked him to show them images of spacecraft. He had every conceivable reason to prioritize his own survival, to flee and hope the blast would not overtake him. Yet he gazed at that terrified child, alone and abandoned within this inferno of metal, and he knew he could not abandon her. He could not even attempt to do so. He moved with swift purpose then, before fear or logical reasoning could restrain him. He covered the distance to the child in 3 long strides. She recoiled, emitting a small sound of apprehension. He turned his back to the plasma charge and dropped to his knees before her, extending his arms wide. His body offered limited protection, but it was all he possessed. He glanced over his shoulder at the charge. The sparks had intensified, shifting from orange to a searing white-blue. Any second now. Ethan turned back to the child and attempted a smile, though he was unsure of its appearance. He wished he could offer words of solace, something to alleviate her fear. But there was no time, and no shared language. So he simply remained there, kneeling with his arms outstretched, a human bulwark against the encroaching oblivion. The child stared at him, her golden eyes shifting from terror to confusion. She could not comprehend his actions, nor why this alien being had placed itself between her and imminent danger. The plasma charge reached a critical point of instability with a sound akin to tearing metal and exploding stars. The shockwave struck Ethan with the force of a freight train traveling at light speed. A heat beyond all measure coursed through him, overwhelming him. He felt his skin charring, his lungs searing. The explosion lifted him, slamming him backward, and everything dissolved into agony, fire, and an incandescent white light. In that fleeting moment of extreme suffering, a peculiar clarity dawned upon him. He hoped his sister would understand. He hoped the child would survive. He hoped it had mattered. Then, there was only darkness. When consciousness returned, it was a slow, reluctant ascent from a comforting void. The first sensation was pain, a deep, throbbing ache that seemed to permeate every single cell of his being. The second was the realization that he was breathing, an improbable outcome given his last memories. The third was sound, a low, rhythmic vibration that he eventually identified as voices chanting in unison. Ethan attempted to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt impossibly heavy. When he finally managed to pry them open, the light caused him to flinch. He blinked several times, trying to clear his vision. He was lying on his back, his gaze fixed on a curved ceiling illuminated by soft, bioluminescent panels. This was not the burning corridor. This was not the dying ship. This was a medical facility, pristine, tranquil, and alive with the hum of monitoring equipment. He turned his head slowly, battling waves of dizziness. The movement caused whatever pain relief medication he was receiving to surge through his system, and the throbbing subsided to a manageable level. He was in a large medical ward, and he was not alone. Along the walls, he could see other beds occupied by patients, both human and Vexorian. Medical personnel moved silently between them, checking vital signs and adjusting treatments. But it was not this that caused him to stare in bewilderment. Standing in orderly ranks, filling the central space of the ward, were Vexorian soldiers, dozens of them clad in full ceremonial armor. Their scales gleamed with iridescent hues in the soft light. They stood perfectly still, utterly silent save for that low, rhythmic chanting he had heard, and they were all on one knee, heads bowed, facing his bed. Ethan tried to sit up, but a gentle hand pressed him back down. A human doctor appeared in his field of vision. A woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She smiled down at him with evident relief. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, her voice brimming with warmth. "Welcome back. You have been unconscious for 3 days. Please do not attempt to move too quickly. You have sustained extensive injuries, though you will make a complete recovery." Ethan's throat was parched, his voice emerging as a dry rasp. "The child, the little girl, is she?" The doctor's smile widened. "She is alive, and entirely unharmed. You shielded her from the blast with your own body. She did not receive so much as a scratch. You absorbed the entire impact." The relief that washed over Ethan was so profound it made him feel lightheaded. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing that knowledge to settle within him. She was alive. He had not perished in vain. When he opened his eyes again, the Vexorian soldiers remained, still kneeling, still chanting. "Why are they doing that?" he inquired. "The soldiers. Why are they kneeling?" The doctor glanced towards the assembled warriors, and a look of awe flickered across her face. "They are performing the ritual of gratitude, an ancient Vexorian ceremony reserved for the most noble acts of honor and sacrifice. They have been taking shifts performing this since you were brought aboard. When one group completes their hour, another arrives to assume their position. They have not ceased for 3 days." "That makes no sense," Ethan murmured. "I am nobody. I'm just a mechanic. I'm not even military." The doctor shook her head slowly. "Mr. Cole, do you comprehend what you accomplished? In Vexorian society, children are held sacred. They are protected above all else. The intentional targeting of a child is considered the most heinous of transgressions, punishable by the complete annihilation of the offender's entire lineage. However, the willingness to relinquish one's own life to save a child, particularly a child of a different species, is regarded as the paramount demonstration of honor. You did not merely save that young girl. You exhibited a moral fortitude that the Vexorian people believed humans were incapable of possessing." Ethan was at a loss for words. He looked at the kneeling soldiers, their bowed heads and their polychromatic scales. "You mentioned the ship was in distress. How did we survive? How did anyone escape?" "The vessel did not survive," the doctor responded. "The explosion you shielded the child from triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. The craft disintegrated approximately 7 minutes after the blast, but emergency response teams managed to reach your section and breach the bulkhead. They discovered you unconscious and the child weeping but alive, still sheltered beneath your form. Both human and Vexorian crews collaborated to evacuate everyone they could reach. The final casualty count was 73 survivors out of 147 individuals on board. It could have been far worse. Ethan absorbed this information gradually. What about the peace negotiations? The summit? The doctor's expression turned serious. The sabotage was the work of extremist factions from both sides, groups that desired the continuation of the conflict. But your actions, Mr. Cole, have yielded unforeseen consequences. When the Vexorian populace learned that a human civilian had sacrificed himself to preserve one of their children, it instigated a fundamental shift. The belligerents on their side lost all credibility. How could they assert that humans were monstrous when one of them had died saving their innocent? And on our side, when the Vexorian rescue teams were observed working in tandem with human crews, risking their own lives to save everyone aboard, it became considerably more difficult to sustain the animosity. She paused, and a faint smile touched her lips. The peace talks did not merely resume, Mr. Cole. They concluded successfully. 3 days ago, while you were incapacitated, both governments ratified a comprehensive peace treaty. The war has ended. And it has concluded largely because you demonstrated to both factions that the other was capable of honor, of self-sacrifice, of cherishing life beyond their own species. Ethan stared at her, attempting to process her words. He had merely sought to protect a frightened child. He had not been contemplating politics, or peace accords, or the grand trajectory of history. He had simply acted as any decent individual would when confronted with a vulnerable child in peril. The notion that this simple act had somehow brought about the end of a 15-year Cold War seemed implausible, utterly absurd. I didn't do anything extraordinary, he said quietly. Anyone would have done the same. The doctor shook her head firmly. No, Mr. Cole. Most people like to believe they would. But when faced with imminent death, instinct takes precedence. Self-preservation is the most potent drive in any living organism. You overcame that instinct. You chose death over witnessing a child perish. That is a rare quality, regardless of species. Movement near the ward's entrance captured Ethan's attention. The rows of kneeling soldiers parted smoothly, forming a pathway down the center. Through this corridor strode a Vexorian who stood even taller than the others, his ceremonial armor more ornate, his scales a deep royal purple interwoven with threads of silver. He moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to command, yet his countenance bore an expression of profound emotion. Accompanying him was a smaller figure, a Vexorian child, adorned in a fresh ceremonial robe of white and gold. She held the tall Vexorian's hand tightly, but her golden eyes were fixed on Ethan with an intensity that made his breath falter. It was her, the child from the corridor. She was alive and unharmed, gazing at him as if he were the architect of the cosmos. The tall Vexorian approached Ethan's bedside and then, with deliberate slowness, lowered himself to one knee. The entire ward seemed to hold its breath. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, yet Ethan detected the undercurrent of emotion. Ethan Cole, he stated, and Ethan noted his English was flawless, albeit with a distinct accent. I am Carvex, Supreme Commander of the Vexorian Military Fleet and a council member of the High Command. I am also the father of this child, this precious spark of life that you preserved at the cost of your own. The child, his daughter, stepped forward and knelt beside her father. She spoke in her native tongue, a fluid, melodic sound that reminded Ethan of water flowing over stones. Her father translated quietly. She says she was terribly frightened, alone in the darkness with the fire and the surrounding danger. She says she believed she was going to die, that her life was ending before it had truly begun. Then you appeared, she says, a human she had been taught to fear. But you did not harm her. You placed yourself between her and death. She says she will never forget your countenance in that final moment before the explosion. How you attempted to smile at her even though you were terrified. She says you gave her your life so she could retain hers. Carvex's voice wavered slightly on the final words. He paused, composing himself, then continued. In our culture, There exists a concept known as the life debt. When one individual saves another's life through personal sacrifice, a sacred covenant is forged that transcends ordinary social bonds. However, what you accomplished surpasses even that ancient tradition. You had no obligation to my daughter. She was not your responsibility, nor your concern. You could have fled, should have fled, and no one would have judged you. But you remained. You chose her existence over your own. He extended a massive hand and gently grasped Ethan's much smaller one. The scales felt smooth and cool against Ethan's skin. Carvex continued, his voice thick with emotion. I have spent 40 years as a warrior. I have commanded fleets in battle. I have faced death and inflicted death. I have witnessed courage in myriad forms. Yet in all those years, I have never beheld an act of such pure heroism as what you performed in that burning corridor. You were unarmed, untrained in combat, facing certain annihilation, and you did not hesitate. You did not calculate the odds or weigh your chances. You simply acted because it was the righteous course. The Supreme Commander rose to his feet, still holding Ethan's hand, and his voice resonated clearly throughout the ward. By the ancient laws of our people and the authority vested in me by the High Command, I declare Ethan Cole to be a guardian of the light, the first human ever to receive this distinction. He shall be accorded all the rights and privileges of the highest Vexorian nobility. His name will be inscribed in the Hall of Eternal Heroes on our homeworld, and his actions this day shall be taught to our children and their children, so that they may understand the true essence of courage. The assembled soldiers rose as one and commenced a new chant, louder and more vigorous than before. The sound filled the ward, reverberating off the walls. The doctor stepped back, her eyes glistening with tears. Carvex's daughter moved forward and placed something small and warm into Ethan's free hand. He looked down to see a crystalline pendant on a silver chain, emitting a soft, internal glow. This is the Star of Valor, Carvex explained. There exist only 17 of them, bestowed across our entire history upon individuals who have displayed unparalleled valor. My daughter desires for you to possess hers. It was conferred upon her at her birth, designating her as nobility. She adamantly asserts that you have merited it significantly more than she, and I concur. Ethan gazed at the crystalline artifact, then at the child's earnest visage, and finally at the father's expression of deep gratitude. He wished to object, to reiterate that he was no one extraordinary, merely a technician who had performed a deed any person would have undertaken. However, the words failed to materialize. These individuals, this entire society, perceived his actions through a lens he could not entirely grasp. To them, his deed was not merely an act of heroism, but a hallowed act transcending ordinary comprehension. He closed his fingers around the crystal and managed a faint nod. The child's face illuminated with delight, and she spoke with great speed in her native tongue. Carvex offered a smile, the first Ethan had witnessed from a Vexorian, and it softened the stern contours of his face. She conveys, "You are now her kinsman, bound by the ordeal of fire and immolation." She communicates that upon reaching maturity, she will recount to all the tale of the valiant human who forfeited his existence so that she might retain hers. She states, "You stand as testament that humans and Vexorans can transcend the status of allies. We can forge a kinship, a family." These pronouncements settled within Ethan's core with an unexpected gravitas. He contemplated his own family, his sister, and her offspring awaiting him back on Earth. He had volunteered for this mission, his sole focus being the financial remuneration, the ability to provide for them more amply. He had never envisioned becoming integral to something of greater consequence, something that might indeed alter the trajectory of history. The medical attendant advanced once more, with gentle intent, signaling that Carvex and his progeny required their patient to recuperate. The Supreme Commander inclined his head in understanding and carefully released Ethan's hand. Yet prior to his departure, he leaned in closely and imparted words softly, intended only for Ethan's ears. "You ought to be aware," he proclaimed, "that your actions have precipitated profound alterations within our armed forces and our administration. The extremist factions responsible for the sabotage have been utterly dissolved. More significantly, the staunch leaders who advocated perpetual conflict with humanity have been compelled to relinquish their offices. How could they maintain their positions when a human demonstrated a capacity for greater honor than any among them? Your single selfless act achieved more than 1,000 diplomats could have accomplished through a century of deliberations. He straightened and placed his hand over his chest in what Ethan recognized as a Vexorian salute. Rest and recover, Ethan Cole. Upon your convalescence, you will discover that the cosmos is a decidedly different realm than it was ere you entered that inferno-engulfed corridor. Carvex and his daughter withdrew, the assembled soldiers forming ranks behind them. As they filed out of the infirmary, each soldier paused at Ethan's bedside and executed that identical gesture of reverence. It consumed nearly 20 minutes for their complete passage, and seemingly endless procession of warriors paying homage to a humble mechanic from Earth. When the final soldier had departed and tranquility returned to the ward, Ethan felt an overwhelming fatigue envelop him. The physician examined his readings and adjusted something on his medical apparatus. "Sleep now," she advised softly. "You face extensive recovery. 2nd and 3rd degree burns across 30% of your physique, 3 fractured ribs, a broken clavicle, and a severe cranial injury. You are fortunate to be alive, though I surmise you do not feel particularly fortunate at this juncture." "Indeed," Ethan replied quietly. "I do. I feel remarkably fortunate. I had the privilege of saving a life. That young girl will live to mature because I was present at the opportune moment. That is worth any measure of suffering." The physician smiled and gently patted his shoulder. "Rest well, champion. The universe will eagerly anticipate your awakening." As Ethan succumbed to slumber, his fingers still clasped the luminous crystalline pendant. He reflected upon Carvex's pronouncements. The cosmos had indeed transformed. Peace had supplanted a cold war. Understanding had superseded suspicion, all because he had performed the sole action his conscience permitted when confronted with a frightened child and imminent demise. His final thought before sleep claimed him was a contemplation of whether his sister had yet been apprised of the events and what her reaction would be when he informed her that he had inadvertently become a hero. The subsequent time Ethan regained consciousness, his chamber was replete with flora. Not terrestrial blossoms, but their Vexorian equivalent, crystalline formations that emitted a soft chime with every air current, producing a delicate melodic resonance. They adorned every available surface, suspended from the ceiling in intricate lacework, standing sentinel in tall vessels on the floor, collectively forming a verdant expanse of glass and luminescence that transformed the medical bay into a scene of enchantment. A nurse, this time a human, observed his stirrings and approached with a welcoming smile. "Mr. Cole, you are conscious? Excellent. You have visitors awaiting. Quite a number of visitors, in fact. The waiting area has been continuously occupied for 2 days. Everyone is eager to meet the individual credited with ending the conflict." "I did not conclude anything," Ethan protested, his voice now stronger, though still raspy. "I merely endeavored to safeguard a child." The nurse's smile adopted a knowing air. "Well, the galaxy diverges from your assessment. You are presently the most celebrated human alive. Both Earth and Vexoria have proclaimed you a hero. There are clamors for monuments, for commemorations in your honor, the whole affair. The diplomatic corps desires to bestow a medal upon you. The Vexorian High Command wishes to integrate you into their aristocracy, and approximately 6,000 news organizations are vying for interviews." Ethan emitted a groan and closed his eyes. "That sounds utterly exhausting." The nurse chuckled. "Indeed. You are absolved from confronting any of it until you are fully recuperated. Doctor's orders. However, there are a few individuals who have been patiently in attendance and whom I believe you might genuinely wish to see." She moved towards the portal and made a beckoning gesture. A moment later, a woman entered with haste. Her face was streaked with tears. Ethan recognized her immediately and felt a prickling sensation in his own eyes. "Sarah," he uttered, his voice faltering on her name. His sister crossed the expanse in mere seconds and very cautiously enveloped him in her arms, mindful of his injuries. She was now openly weeping, her entire frame trembling. "You absolute fool," she murmured into his shoulder. "You magnificent, brave, foolish idiot. When they informed me of what transpired, when they stated you were succumbing, I believed I had lost you. I feared my children would grow up without their uncle. I despaired of ever seeing you again." "I am well," Ethan affirmed, returning her embrace as tightly as he dared. "I am alive. I shall recover completely." Sarah drew back and studied him, her eyes red but resolute. "They showed me the recordings," she declared, "from the ship's security cameras. They depicted your stance between that child and the detonation." "Ethan, that was the most courageous and terrifying spectacle I have ever witnessed. I am uncertain whether to embrace you or strike you for undertaking such a perilous risk." "I apologize," Ethan conveyed. "I did not intend to alarm you. I simply could not abandon her. You comprehend, do you not? Had it been one of your offspring, you would have acted precisely as I did." Sarah's expression softened and she nodded slowly. "Yes," she conceded quietly. "Yes, I would have. And for that very reason, I am not angered, merely terrified, profoundly grateful and immeasurably proud of you. I cannot bear it." Emerging from behind her, two small faces peered around the doorway. Ethan's nephews, Marcus, aged 8, and Tyler, 6, regarded him with wide, astonished eyes. Sarah beckoned them forward, and they approached with trepidation, as if fearing he might fracture. "Uncle E?" Marcus inquired in a hushed tone. "Are you well? Mom said you were gravely injured." "I am recuperating," Ethan reassured him. "The physicians here are exceptionally skilled. I shall be ambulatory in no time." Tyler, the younger boy, was fixedly observing the crystalline pendant still adorning Ethan's neck. "Is that enchantment?" he questioned with an earnestness exclusive to a 6-year-old. "Sort of," Ethan responded with a smile. "It was a gift from the young lady I assisted. She is a princess. In truth, an actual extraterrestrial princess." Both boys' eyes widened further. "You rescued a princess?" Marcus breathed. "Uncle E, you are akin to a genuine superhero." "I am not a superhero," Ethan countered. "I am merely your uncle who repairs air conditioning units and occasionally acts with rectitude." Sarah tightened her grip on his hand. "To them, you are a superhero. To a great many individuals, you are. You will need to grow accustomed to that." They remained for an additional hour, updating Ethan on all that had transpired during the 3 days he had been unconscious. The media coverage had been relentless, with every prominent news outlet on both Earth and Vexoria broadcasting the narrative. The visual recordings from the ship's security systems had gone viral, vividly portraying Ethan's final moments before the explosion with heart-wrenching clarity. Both governments had expedited the peace accord in response to public outcry, with citizens on either side demanding a cessation of hostilities after witnessing such a potent demonstration of interspecies empathy. As visiting hours concluded and Sarah needed to escort the boys back to their temporary lodgings on the station, Ethan was left to his contemplations. The crystalline pendant upon his chest pulsed with a gentle radiance in rhythm with his heartbeat, a perpetual reminder of his actions and the life he had preserved. He contemplated Carvex's daughter, those golden eyes that had transitioned from terror to bewilderment, and then a silent query as to whether she had comprehended his intentions. He recalled the instant the blast struck, the certainty of his impending demise, and the peculiar serenity that accompanied the knowledge that it was for a worthy cause. He had never considered himself particularly courageous. During his formative years, he had been the quiet child who avoided contention, who preferred mending things over engaging in disputes. In scholastic pursuits, he was neither the most robust nor the most intellectually gifted, merely average in most respects. His educators had characterized him as dependable, steady, the sort of person one could rely upon, but who would never set the world aflame. He had been content with that appraisal. He had never desired to be exceptional or noteworthy. He simply wished to lead a decent existence, assist others when possible, and perhaps leave the world marginally improved from his encounter with it. Now, by some inexplicable means, he had become an emblem, a conduit between two species teetering on the precipice of conflict. The individual who proved that humans could act with honor even in the face of oblivion. It was overwhelming, and more than a little daunting. Over the subsequent week, as Ethan's physical frame gradually mended, the veracity of Sarah's declarations became increasingly apparent. The galaxy yearned to encounter him, to express its gratitude, to bestow upon him every conceivable honor. The Vexorian High Command dispatched a delegation that included 3 council members, each of whom spent considerable time detailing the profound impact his actions had exerted upon their society. The hardline military cadre, which had exerted dominance over Vexorian politics for decades, had collapsed almost instantaneously. Younger Vexorians were enrolling in cultural exchange programs with Earth in unprecedented numbers, eager to learn about the species capable of producing an individual like Ethan Cole. The human government reciprocated with equal enthusiasm. While Ethan found their attentiveness somewhat more discomforting, politicians who had cultivated careers on hawkish anti-Vexorian discourse suddenly desired photographs with him, sought to assert their long-standing support for peace, and yearned to align themselves with his heroism. The Secretary General of the United Earth Council extended a personal congratulatory call and an invitation to address the entire assembly upon his recovery. News organizations proffered exorbitant sums for exclusive interviews. Publishers sought to acquire his life narrative. Entertainment conglomerates expressed interest in producing motion pictures about him. Throughout this deluge, Ethan resolutely maintained his inherent disposition. He granted a few interviews, primarily to outlets he trusted to accurately portray the events, but he declined the substantial monetary offers. He consented to accept the official accolades from both governing bodies, but he stipulated that the ceremonies be understated and dignified rather than the grand spectacles the organizers had initially envisioned. When offered a position as a special ambassadorial representative between Earth and Vexoria, complete with a remuneration that would have rendered him extraordinarily affluent, he declined. "I am a mechanic," he informed the visibly disappointed representative of the diplomatic corps. "That is my aptitude. That is what I find fulfilling. I harbor no desire to be a professional hero or a walking effigy. My aim is to repair, to assist, and to lead my life." However, the galaxy was not yet prepared to permit his return to obscurity. 3 weeks subsequent to the detonation, when Ethan received clearance for limited activity, Carvex arrived with his daughter, bearing an invitation. "The Vexorian homeworld wishes to accord you distinction." The Supreme Commander elaborated, "A ceremony will be held to induct you into the pantheon of eternal heroes. Your name will be inscribed upon the living stone of our most hallowed sanctuary, alongside the most esteemed warriors and leaders in our annals. My daughter insists upon escorting you. She has inquired about you daily, eager to know when you would be sufficiently recovered to visit." The child, whose name Ethan had ascertained to be Thesa, stood beside her father with barely restrained anticipation. She had been undergoing intensive English instruction and could now articulate simple sentences, though her accent rendered certain words somewhat challenging to decipher. "Please accompany us," she implored earnestly. "I wish to showcase my homeland to you. I desire for everyone to meet my kinsman." Ethan met her bright golden gaze and found himself incapable of refusal. Notwithstanding his previous pronouncements regarding his reluctance to be a symbol, he could not decline this child whom he had rescued. If she wished to present him to her people, if she desired the cosmos to witness him honored in a manner deemed appropriate by her culture, then he would endure it for her sake. The transit to Vexoria spanned 2 days aboard a high-velocity diplomatic vessel. Ethan spent the majority of the voyage in his personal quarters, still recuperating from his injuries and attempting to mentally prepare for the impending events. Sarah had expressed a desire to accompany him, but he had persuaded her to remain at the station with the boys. This was an experience he needed to confront independently. Fesha frequented his quarters during the journey, offering him novel Vexorian delicacies to sample and conversing animatedly in her improving English about the wonders they would behold upon arrival. She had evidently appointed herself as his guide and protector, a reversal of roles that Ethan found both touching and amusing. She recounted details of her studies, her companions, and her preferred pastimes. She was acquiring the art of painting, she mentioned, and aspired to create a portrait of him for her room. She had already attempted this on several occasions, but had been unable to perfectly capture his likeness as she recalled it from that pivotal moment in the corridor. When Ethan inquired about her recollections of that day, Thesha grew silent and contemplative. Her young countenance assumed a solemnity that belied her years. "I recall being consumed by terror," she stated slowly. "I believed the flames would engulf me. I felt I would perish in solitude within the darkness. Then you appeared. Initially, I experienced amplified fear because you were human, and Father had always cautioned me that humans were perilous. But then you knelt and extended your arms, and I understood. You intended to shield me. You would be my bulwark. She reached out and gently touched the pendant adorning Ethan's neck. I comprehended what was imminent. I was aware that the brilliant object on the wall was poised to detonate. I endeavored to urge you to flee, but you do not converse in our tongue. You merely offered a reassuring smile and remained. When the explosion occurred, it was deafening and incandescent. I sealed my eyes and felt the heat, yet it did not touch me. You absorbed it all? Her golden eyes welled with tears. When the soldiers arrived and removed the debris, I beheld you lying there. Your back was severely burned and you were motionless. I believed you were deceased. I believed you had sacrificed yourself to save me. I wept incessantly. I implored the soldiers to preserve you, proclaiming you a hero. They conveyed us both away, and I did not see you again until you awoke in the medical facility. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Father professes, I am alive, owing to you. He states, I am afforded the opportunity to mature, to attend school, and perhaps to establish my own progeny someday because you elected to perish for me. He declares, that represents the most precious endowment ever bestowed upon our family. He instructs, I must forever recall it and honor it by leading a virtuous life. Ethan found his own eyes moistening. He drew Thesha into a tender embrace. You need not undertake any extraordinary feats, he murmured softly. Simply be content. Simply live your existence and extend kindness to others. That suffices. That is more than adequate. As the vessel finally achieved orbit around Vexoria, Ethan pressed his countenance against the observation viewport, akin to a child. The planet was breathtaking, its surface a mesmerizing confluence of deep purples and blues, with vast oceans that shimmered like precious jewels. Cities twinkled across the continents, their architectural designs vertical and elegant, ascending towards the heavens in graceful spirals. It was alien, peculiar, and magnificent. The ceremony was slated for the ensuing day, affording Ethan time for rest and acclimatization. Carvex had made arrangements for his accommodation within the palace, an immense edifice that seemed to have organically emerged from the living rock of a mountain. The guest quarters provided were more expansive than Ethan's entire dwelling back on Earth, featuring windows that offered panoramic vistas of a metropolis comprising millions. That evening, unable to sleep due to apprehension and the unfamiliarity of his surroundings, Ethan stood by the window and observed the urban illumination. He contemplated the serendipitous chain of events that had led a humble technician from Earth to a palatial residence on an alien world. Had someone informed him 3 months prior that he would end a war and achieve hero status among 2 species, he would have deemed them utterly irrational. A gentle rap on his door interrupted his reverie. Upon opening it, he discovered Thesa standing there in her sleep attire, her father behind her, appearing apologetic. She found herself unable to sleep, Carvex explained. She insisted on verifying your comfort and ensuring you lacked for nothing. She harbors concern for you. I am well, Ethan assured them both, merely a touch apprehensive about tomorrow. Thea gazed up at him with solicitude. Will there be a substantial gathering? She inquired. Carvex responded before Ethan could. The ceremony will be broadcast throughout the entire planet. Approximately 4 billion Vexorians will be observing. Representatives from every significant celestial body in the region will be in attendance. It will be, he stated with a subtle smile, quite an extensive affair. Ethan felt his stomach lurch at the mere mention of billions. He had been aware the ceremony would be significant, but somehow the actual figure rendered it tangibly real in a manner it had not been previously. Fesha must have discerned the apprehension etched upon his countenance, for she reached out and clasped his hand. Do not be fearful, she implored earnestly. I shall remain by your side. I shall not permit any harm to befall you. It is now my turn to protect you. The unfeigned sincerity of her words, the inversion of roles where this child pledged to ensure his safety, evoked a smile from Ethan despite his unease. Thank you, he responded. That provides me solace. Satisfied that he was well, Thesa permitted her father to guide her back to her sleeping quarters, but she paused at the doorway and cast a backward glance. Uncle Ethan, she stated, employing the appellation she had adopted for him, I am grateful you did not flee. I am grateful you remained with me. Ethan nodded, his voice failing him. After their departure, he returned to the window and stood there for a prolonged period, gazing at the alien cityscape and contemplating choices, their ramifications, and the peculiar ways in which courage could reshape the world. The subsequent morning dawned clear and resplendent. Attendants arrived ahead of schedule, assisting Ethan with donning the meticulously prepared formal wear. This attire seamlessly blended human and Vexorian aesthetics, achieving a remarkable balance of sophistication and ease. The crystalline amulet, prominently displayed on his chest, captured the ambient light, projecting a spectrum of colors across the chamber's surfaces. When the appointed hour arrived, Carvex and Thesa appeared to escort him. The Supreme Commander was clad in his full ceremonial regalia, each component polished to a dazzling sheen. Fesh, meanwhile, was adorned in an elegant white and gold gown, her scales meticulously groomed to shimmer with an ethereal iridescence. Without a moment's hesitation, she extended her hand to Ethan and looked up at him with a smile. "Ready?" she inquired. "As I'll ever be," Ethan responded. They proceeded through the palace, traversing corridors hewn from living rock and adorned with tapestries depicting Vexorian historical events. As they passed, guards snapped to attention, rendering a salute with their hands placed over their hearts. Attendants offered deep bows. Every individual they encountered regarded Ethan with an expression of profound respect. The Hall of Eternal Heroes, situated at the core of the palace, was a colossal chamber with an arched ceiling soaring hundreds of feet overhead. Its walls, fashioned from a singular, self-illuminating stone, bore the inscriptions of thousands of names in elegant Vexorian script. Each appellation represented a hero, a warrior, or a leader who had rendered exceptional service to their people. The hall teemed with Vexorans, delegates representing countless worlds and affiliations. They stood in solemn reverence as Ethan entered, parting to form a clear pathway to the chamber's center. At the far end, upon an elevated dais, stood the entirety of the High Command, comprising 7 of the Vexorian Empire's most influential figures. They wore robes of office in a deep amethyst hue, accented with silver trim, and their scales were marked with ceremonial paint and patterns signifying their rank and accomplishments. Ethan advanced, Fesh's hand still firmly clasped in his, with Carvex at his other side. The silence was absolute, disturbed only by the soft echo of their footsteps. Upon reaching the dais, Carvex guided him to the central position while Thesa rejoined the royal family. The senior member of the High Command stepped forward. His scales, faded with age, bore the wisdom of decades of governance. His voice, amplified by the chamber's resonant acoustics, carried clearly through the vast space. "We convene today to honor one not of our lineage, one who owes us no allegiance, and who bore no obligation to our progeny or our future. We gather to acknowledge Ethan Cole, a human who exhibited courage beyond measure and compassion beyond calculation. In our darkest hour, when death loomed and escape was feasible, he chose self-sacrifice. He opted to shield our offspring with his own person. He elected to perish so that she might endure." The elder turned to face Ethan directly. "Ethan Cole, through your actions, you have demonstrated that valor transcends species. You have taught us that bravery can manifest in the most unexpected quarters. You have proven that the ties binding sentient beings can surmount history, politics, and even the instinct for self-preservation. You bestowed upon us the most invaluable gift any being can offer, the life of our child, purchased with what you believe to be your own." He raised a long crystalline blade, its surface intricately etched with flowing script. "This is the Blade of Names, employed for over 3,000 years to immortalize the heroes of our people. Today, for the inaugural instance in our chronicles, we shall utilize it to engrave the name of one not born of Vexoria." The elder approached the wall behind the dais, where a section of stone remained unadorned, reserved for nascent heroes. He pressed the blade against the luminous surface, commencing the inscription. Script flowed from the blade in luminous lines, searing themselves indelibly into the stone. Ethan, unable to comprehend the Vexorian characters, watched as his name materialized in an alien tongue, becoming an integral part of a legacy spanning millennia. Upon completion, the elder turned back to Ethan and uttered words in the Vexorian language, formal and resonant, before translating into English. By the venerable customs of our people and the authority vested in this council, we proclaim Ethan Cole as guardian of the light, protector of the innocent, and shield of the future. His name is now irrevocably linked with ours. His legacy is now interwoven with our history. His courage now serves as our exemplar. The entire assembly, in perfect synchrony, lowered themselves to one knee. Billions watched across the planet, with millions more on allied worlds, all bearing witness to this pivotal moment. The elder remained standing, placing a hand over his chest in salute. Ethan Cole, we express our profound gratitude. Our children thank you. Our future thanks you. You have gifted us something we desperately required, the hope that our species and yours can forge a brighter future together. You have illuminated that a being's worth is determined not by their species or strength, but by their choices when confronted with insurmountable adversity. He gestured towards the wall, towards the radiant script of Ethan's name amongst those of the heroes. This testament shall endure for as long as our civilization persists. Millennia hence, when the very constellations have shifted their courses, your name will remain. Future generations will learn your story, understanding that a human mechanic, armed solely with their own person and their valor, saved a Vexorian child, thereby averting a conflict that would have decimated both our peoples. The elder extended his hand, which Ethan grasped, sealing the moment. Then, the assembled thousands rose as one, commencing a thunderous chant that reverberated through the hall like crashing waves. It was the identical cadence the soldiers had performed in the medical bay, but amplified manifold. The sound shook the very foundations of the edifice, and Ethan felt its resonance within his chest, his bones, and the crystalline pendant pulsing against his heart. As the chant subsided, the formal ceremony concluded, and the gathering transformed into a more intimate affair. Vexorans approached in an unending stream, each eager to meet him, express their thanks, clasp his hand, or simply stand in his presence. Many displayed tears in their golden eyes. Some presented their offspring, lifting them so they could behold the human hero. Parents conveyed their intention to recount his tale to their descendants, ensuring his story would be passed down through generations as a paragon of true courage. Fesh remained close throughout, proudly introducing her uncle to every visitor. She had appointed herself his guardian for the day, embracing her self-assigned duty with utmost seriousness. Perceiving his growing fatigue from the incessant attention, she politely but firmly informed attendees that he required rest, creating a personal space with the imperious authority unique to a child. As the day progressed and the crowds gradually thinned, Carvex approached, accompanied by several members of the High Command. "Ethan Cole," the Supreme Commander stated formally, "we have been deliberating matters of considerable significance. The peace accord between our peoples is now ratified, yet considerable effort is still necessary to cultivate genuine understanding and collaboration. We propose the establishment of a novel institution, a joint cultural exchange academy, where young humans and Vexorans can learn collaboratively, foster friendships, and lay the groundwork for an enduring alliance." One of the council members stepped forward. "We wish to name this academy in your honor," she declared, "the Ethan Cole Institute for Interspecies Understanding. It will serve as a living tribute to what you embody, a place where your example of cross-species compassion can inspire future generations." Ethan felt profoundly moved by the proposal, an entire institute bearing his name, educating thousands. It far surpassed anything he could have envisioned. Yet, observing Thesa at his side, her golden eyes filled with hope, he knew he could not decline. If his name could facilitate unity between the two species, if it could preempt future discord and preserve lives, then he had to accept, irrespective of his personal aversion to such attention. "I would be deeply honored," he replied quietly, "but only if you pledge to emphasize the lesson and not the individual. I do not wish for students to venerate a hero. I desire them to learn to act with valor when it truly matters, to cherish life across all species, and to choose empathy over apprehension. Can you promise me this?" Carvex nodded solemnly. "You have our word. The Institute will expound upon your actions, not your legend. It will inspire students to discover their own bravery rather than merely admire yours? Then yes, Ethan declared. I accept. The council members appeared gratified, and one immediately commenced outlining plans and timelines. However, Carvex raised a hand. Details can be discussed later. Today is for celebration. Tonight, a feast will be held in Ethan Cole's honor. The entire palace is preparing, and representatives from Earth have arrived to join us. It shall be a true fusion of our cultures, the first of many such occasions, we trust. The subsequent feast was indeed a resplendent affair. Long tables laden with culinary delights from both Earth and Vexoria filled the palace's grand hall. Humans and Vexorans mingled with ease, their initial reticence giving way to genuine curiosity and warmth. Music, a harmonious blend of human and Vexorian instruments, filled the air, creating something entirely novel and beautiful. Ethan found himself seated at the head table, flanked by Carvex and the human Secretary General, who had traveled from Earth specifically for the ceremony. Fesh occupied the seat to his other side, having insisted on remaining with her uncle, even for the formal dinner. She dined with careful decorum, eager to demonstrate to the adults that she belonged at the prestigious table. During the meal, the Secretary General leaned towards Ethan and spoke softly. Mr. Cole, I want you to understand that your actions extend far beyond saving a single child, or even concluding the Cold War with Vexoria. You have provided humanity with something we profoundly needed, a narrative that reminds us of our inherent capacity for good. In an era where we sometimes struggle to find hope, you have become a beacon. She paused, selecting her words with care. I know you eschew being a symbol or a legend. I comprehend your desire to return to your ordinary life, but I hope you grasp that you have become something more significant, whether by design or by circumstance. Children on Earth are already emulating you in their games, portraying the brave mechanic who rescued the alien princess. Schools are incorporating your story into their ethics curricula. You have inspired millions to strive for betterment, to act with greater courage and compassion. I am still merely a mechanic, Ethan stated softly. I still prefer working with my hands to delivering speeches. I still feel a sense of unease in large gatherings. Saving a life does not fundamentally alter who I am. The Secretary General offered a smile. No, but it revealed who you are, fundamentally. That is the distinction. You did not acquire bravery that day. You simply demonstrated the courage you always possessed when circumstances demanded it. Across the table, Carvex raised his glass, soliciting attention. The conversations gradually subsided as all eyes turned to the Supreme Commander. A toast, Carvex announced, to Ethan Cole, who proved that the highest virtues are not the exclusive domain of any single species. To the man who valued the life of a child he did not know above his own survival. To the hero who concluded a war not with weaponry, but with an act of pure, selfless love. The entire hall rose, lifting their glasses. Humans and Vexorans united, their voices echoing the toast as they drank deeply. Ethan felt a flush of embarrassment, yet managed a smile and a nod of gratitude. Beside him, Thesa tugged at his sleeve. As he leaned down, she whispered, You are a very important person now, Uncle Ethan, but you are still my uncle first. Promise you will not forget me when you return to Earth. Ethan embraced her gently. I could never forget you, he whispered back. You are with me forever. That is what family signifies. The little girl beamed and settled back into her chair, content. The celebration continued well into the night. Musicians played, dancers performed traditional routines from both cultures, and dignitaries delivered speeches lauding the new era of cooperation. Throughout it all, Ethan experienced a peculiar duality. A part of him felt overwhelmed and uncomfortable with the attention, yearning for solitude. Yet another part, a part he had not realized existed prior to that day in the burning corridor, felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had accomplished something meaningful. He had made a decision that preserved a life and altered the course of history. Regardless of his discomfort with the spotlight, he could not regret the action that had brought it about. In the ensuing weeks, as Ethan gradually readjusted to a semblance of normalcy, the full extent of the transformation became apparent. The Joint Cultural Exchange Academy received accelerated approval from both governments, with construction commencing simultaneously on campuses in Earth and Vexoria. Applications poured in from young individuals eager to be part of the inaugural generation to study across species lines. The program was oversubscribed by a factor of 50, necessitating the establishment of additional facilities to accommodate the overwhelming demand. Ethan attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the Earth campus, held in Geneva, the very site where the peace treaty had been signed. Sarah and his nephews accompanied him, and he delivered a concise address emphasizing the paramount importance of understanding over apprehension and of empathy over conflict. The speech was broadcast throughout human space, garnering millions of positive responses. Despite his aversion to public speaking, Ethan found himself engaging in it more frequently, accepting select invitations to share his experiences and the lessons he had learned about courage and choice. He also maintained regular communication with Thessa and Carvex. The young girl contacted him weekly via the Interstellar Communication Network, enthusiastically detailing her school life, her friends, and an ongoing painting project. She herself had become something of a public figure, the child whose rescue had catalyzed the peace. However, Carvex and his family diligently strove to provide her with as normal a childhood as possible, shielding her from the most intense scrutiny while still allowing her to recount her experience when she desired. 6 months following the explosion, Ethan was invited back to Vexoria for the formal inauguration of the Academy's principal campus. This time, he brought Sarah and the boys, wishing for them to witness the tangible outcome of their uncle's actions. They toured the facilities together, exploring classrooms where human and Vexorian students would soon engage in collaborative learning, laboratories equipped with cutting-edge technology from both species, and dormitories designed to cater to the diverse needs of multiple species while fostering interaction and friendship. At the campus's core stood a statue. It depicted a human figure kneeling, arms outstretched protectively, with a small Vexorian child positioned behind those embracing arms. The sculpture was rendered from the same luminous stone as the Hall of Eternal Heroes, and at its base rested a plaque inscribed in both English and Vexorian. Ethan read the English inscription, his eyes welling with tears. Here rests a mechanic who became a hero, not through martial prowess, but through strength of heart. Here rests a human who valued one alien life above their own. Here rests a man who taught two species that courage knows no boundaries and compassion requires no common language. May all who pass remember that the greatest acts of heroism often emanate from the most unexpected sources, and that anyone, in the right moment, can choose to be extraordinary. Marcus and Tyler stood on either side of the statue, gazing up at it with evident awe. "That's really you, Uncle E," Marcus said softly. "You're in a statue." "It's not truly me," Ethan replied. "It's an idea. It's a reminder to everyone who sees it that they possess the capacity to act rightly when it matters most." Tyler reached out and touched the stone. "When I grow up," he stated, "I want to be brave like you." Ethan knelt to his nephew's level. "You don't have to wait until you grow up to be brave. You can be brave right now, in small ways, every day. Standing up for someone being bullied, telling the truth when it's difficult, being kind when others are not. Those are all forms of courage. The grand, dramatic moment, like what happened to me, that's rare. But the everyday courage to simply be a good person, that's something everyone can practice." At the opening ceremony that afternoon, Ethan stood alongside Carvex and several human dignitaries to officially dedicate the campus. Thousands attended in person, with millions more observing across both human and Vexorian space. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he kept his remarks concise. "I am not an educator, a diplomat, or a warrior," he stated. "I am a mechanic who made a choice. But what I have learned in the months since that day is that we all make choices every single day about what kind of people we want to be and what kind of galaxy we want to inhabit. This academy exists to assist young individuals in making those choices with wisdom and empathy. It exists to demonstrate that our differences can be sources of strength rather than conflict." He gestured to the statue behind him. That moment, frozen in stone, lasted only seconds. But what it represents, the willingness to protect the innocent at personal cost, that is eternal. That is what binds civilized beings together, regardless of our species. I hope every student who walks through these doors will remember that their choices matter, that in the right moment, any one of them could be the person who makes a difference. That heroism is not about being fearless, but about acting in spite of fear, because something holds greater significance than one's own safety. Ethan paused and surveyed the sea of faces, human and Vexorian intermingled. I also hope you will remember that we are all someone's child. Fesh is Carvex's daughter. She is precious to her family, just as your children are precious to you. When I saw her in that corridor, I did not see an alien, or a Vexorian, or the daughter of a Supreme Commander. I saw a frightened child who needed assistance. That is what I hope this academy will teach. To see each other not as outsiders, or strangers, or potential adversaries, but as people, as beings with families and aspirations, and the same fundamental desire to live, to be safe, and perhaps to make the galaxy a little better. He stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. Fesh rushed forward and hugged him tightly, and the cameras captured that moment, the alien child and the human hero embracing, a perfect emblem of what is achievable when apprehension is superseded by compassion. In the years that followed, Ethan Cole did indeed return to his trade as a mechanic. He went back to Earth, resuming the repair of air conditioning systems and hull seals. However, he also served on the Academy's board, contributing to its development and ensuring its adherence to its core mission. He delivered occasional speeches when requested, consistently emphasizing that heroism was a choice accessible to everyone, rather than a rare attribute possessed by a select few. He watched with pride as the initial cohorts graduated from the Ethan Cole Institute. Young humans and Vexorans had forged bonds that transcended species. Many of them subsequently became diplomats, scientists, artists, and educators who disseminated the message of collaboration. The amity between humankind and Vexoria flourished, expanding through commerce, scientific alliances, and cultural exchanges becoming commonplace. Fesh blossomed into an exceptional young woman, possessing brilliance and deep empathy, committed to honoring her uncle's ultimate sacrifice by dedicating her existence to fostering connections between different species. She emerged as a prominent champion for interspecies cooperation, journeying to numerous celestial bodies to recount her personal saga and the human who had been her savior. She completed her portrait of Ethan, a piece she had labored on for many years, capturing not merely his visage but the pivotal instant of decision, the precise moment he prioritized her life above his own. This artwork was prominently displayed in the Academy's Central Hall, serving as a perpetual reminder to every student of their educational purpose. On the 15th anniversary of that pivotal incident, a joint commemoration was held at the very location where the annihilated diplomatic craft had once been. A monument now graced the void. It was a circular arrangement of crystalline panels, expertly designed to capture and refract the light emanating from distant stars. Etched upon these panels were the names of every soul lost in the act of sabotage, alongside the names of the heroic responders who had preserved countless lives that fateful day. Dignitaries from both human and Vexorian delegations were in attendance, and Ethan was accorded the profound honor of inaugurating the memorial. He stood upon the observation deck of the ceremonial vessel, his gaze fixed upon the languidly revolving ring of inscribed names. Sarah stood by his side, her once vibrant hair now streaked with threads of silver. Marcus and Tyler were also present, both young men now, Marcus on the cusp of entering the diplomatic corps, and Tyler intending to enroll in the academy that bore his uncle's name. This memorial serves to commemorate not only those who perished, but also those who extended aid, Ethan articulated when it was his turn to address the assembly. However, I wish to also acknowledge a distinct form of valor. The fortitude demonstrated by both our species in opting for concord over conflict, following generations steeped in animosity. The resolve to extend trust when such a sentiment seemed utterly unattainable. The wisdom to regard an entity fundamentally dissimilar and perceive not a threat, but a potential ally. He cast his thoughts back to that day, 15 years prior, to the inferno-ravaged corridor, the frightened child, and the seemingly insurmountable choice that had, in that instant, felt remarkably straightforward. My actions in preserving Thea's life have been lauded as heroic, he continued. But the genuine heroism resides in what transpired subsequently. The individuals on both sides who consciously chose to believe in the feasibility of peace. The young minds who matriculated into the academy, defying the apprehensions of their elders. The families who graciously opened their dwellings to visiting scholars from another species. The billions of individuals who made the daily, deliberate choice to eschew animosity and embrace collaboration. That, truly, is the narrative. Not a solitary man's fleeting act of sacrifice, but the unwavering commitment of an entire civilization striving for betterment. As the memorial was officially consecrated and its inscriptions began to emanate a gentle inner luminescence, Ethan felt a hand tentatively intertwine with his. He looked down to behold Thesa, now a woman, yet unmistakably the child he had rescued. She gazed up at him with those familiar golden eyes, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not solely for preserving my existence on that day, an act for which I shall be eternally indebted until the very stars extinguish, but thank you for demonstrating to us all the boundless possibilities that lay before us. Thank you for believing that we were worthy of salvation." Ethan gently squeezed her hand. "You were always deserving of salvation. Every single one of you, every Vexorian and human alike, you were consistently worth the arduous endeavor of striving to forge something superior. I merely found myself in the opportune circumstance at the opportune juncture to make that evident." They stood together, human and Vexorian, uncle and niece, bound not by lineage, but by shared commitment and sacrifice, observing the memorial slowly revolve amidst the starlight. Around them, representatives from a dozen distinct species congregated to honor the departed and celebrate the tranquility that had bloomed from profound sorrow. Later that evening, as Ethan prepared for his departure back to Earth, Carvex approached him for a private discourse. The Supreme Commander had aged, his scales exhibiting a subtle fading with the passage of time, yet his eyes retained their characteristic keenness and sharp intellect. "Ethan Cole," he began, "I wish to engage you in conversation prior to your departure. 15 years ago, you bestowed upon me the most profound gift any father could ever receive. You granted my daughter an unblemished future, but what I have come to comprehend in the intervening years is that you bestowed upon all of us something of equally immeasurable value. You provided us with a paradigm to emulate. You illuminated for us that the zenith of bravery is not the willingness to inflict harm for one's convictions, but the willingness to surrender one's life in defense of that which one cherishes." He placed a hand over his chest, executing the Vexorian gesture of respect. "I have been a combatant throughout my entire existence. I have commanded vast armies and triumphed in numerous engagements. I have been lauded for my strategic acumen and my tactical prowess. Yet I shall be remembered, if I am remembered at all, as the father of the child whom Ethan Cole safeguarded. And I consider this the highest accolade I could possibly attain, for it signifies my enduring connection to you, to your enduring legacy, and to the exemplary path you have charted. Thank you, my esteemed companion," he continued. "Thank you for revealing to us all the potential that resides within us." The two clasped hands, human and Vexorian, warrior and engineer, inextricably linked by the singular moment that had irrevocably altered their destinies. As Ethan's vessel detached from the memorial station and commenced its homeward voyage to Earth, he stood by the observation window, his gaze fixed upon the celestial expanse. Somewhere within that vastness, young individuals from a dozen different species were engaged in collaborative learning at the academy bearing his name. Somewhere, humans and Vexorans were diligently collaborating on initiatives that would have been utterly inconceivable a mere generation prior. Somewhere, a young girl he had once rescued was now a woman actively contributing to the betterment of the galaxy for all its inhabitants. He had never aspired to be a hero. His sole ambition had been to mend what was broken, to offer assistance to others, and to lead a life of integrity. In retrospect, he surmised, he had accomplished precisely that. He had repaired a fractured relationship between two disparate species. He had aided countless individuals, billions in fact, by demonstrating the viability of cooperative endeavor. And he had lived a life of decency, a life punctuated by a singular act of extraordinary courage, yet defined by years of quiet dedication to ensuring that moment's impact resonated. The crystalline pendant, still adorning his neck, emitted a soft, internal glow. He gently touched it, his thoughts drifting to Thesa, to her father, and to all the individuals whose lives had been irrevocably altered by a split-second decision made within a burning corridor. He pondered how narrowly he had avoided volunteering for that diplomatic assignment, how effortlessly he could have remained at home, leaving another to serve as the mechanic aboard that vessel. How history might have unfolded so drastically differently had he possessed even a modicum of increased risk aversion, or been less concerned with the supplementary remuneration. Yet, he had undertaken the mission, and he had been present. And when the critical juncture arrived, he had made the choice that felt intrinsically correct, despite the considerable personal cost of everything he had believed he would lose. Miraculously, he had survived to witness the world that single decision had engendered. A world where former adversaries collaborated, where children were educated to perceive beyond species-based distinctions, where valor and empathy were esteemed above brute force and dominance. It was, Ethan reflected as Earth grew ever larger in the observation viewport, a remarkably positive outcome for a mechanic whose primary desire was to assist others. Not an ideal scenario, certainly not utopian, but demonstrably improved. And perhaps that was the ultimate aspiration attainable by anyone. Not to rectify every imperfection or resolve every conundrum, but to effect a marginal enhancement upon the circumstances one encounters. The vessel pierced Earth's atmosphere, and Ethan prepared to rejoin his sister and nephews, to return to his modest dwelling and his workshop brimming with tools, to the comforting rhythm of a life devoted to repairs. However, he carried with him the profound realization that he had already mended the most significant breach of all. He had helped bridge the chasm between species, proving that the noblest attributes of humanity and the Vexerans could converge, giving rise to something truly magnificent. And it had all commenced with a terrified child, a corridor aflame, and a simple decision to stand as a bulwark between her and the imminent detonation. To willingly sacrifice his own life in preservation of hers, thereby demonstrating in the most visceral manner conceivable that certain entities were indeed worth dying for, and that occasionally, with a measure of profound fortune, those entities were also worth living for. Ethan Cole returned to Earth as a hero, yet he lived as a mechanic, and within this delicate equilibrium between public acclaim and personal privacy, between his enduring legacy and his daily existence, he found profound contentment. He had fulfilled his obligation when it mattered most. He had made the correct choice at the pivotal moment. And ultimately, was that not the full extent of any individual's capacity? To render sound decisions when presented with opportunities, and to trust that these choices would cascade outward, fostering an improved reality? The craft alighted gently at the spaceport, and Ethan gathered his possessions. As he descended the ramp into the resplendent sunlight of Earth, he observed Sarah and the boys awaiting him, accompanied by a modest assembly of journalists and well-wishers. He emitted a sigh, yet a smile played on his lips. This was his current reality, the unforeseen consequence of adhering to his principles. He could manage it. He had confronted far more daunting challenges within that inferno-ravaged corridor 15 years prior. And as he embraced his sister, tousled his nephew's hair, and faced the assembled cameras with an air of patient dignity, he knew with unwavering certainty that he would willingly undertake it all again, without a moment's hesitation. He would position himself between that child and that explosion 1,000 times over. For that, he understood, represented the pinnacle of human virtue at its finest. To elect compassion over self-preservation. To ascribe value to life that transcended the arbitrary boundaries of species, culture, or personal affiliation. Ethan Cole had inadvertently become an interworld emissary. He had effectively ended a protracted conflict without resorting to violence. He had substantiated the notion that heroism could be discovered in the most unexpected of settings and within the most improbable of individuals. And all that had been necessitated was a single instance of unadulterated selfless bravery. One decision to stand resolutely rather than flee. One affirmation that a frightened child's existence held greater significance than his own. It was sufficient. It was more than sufficient. It was everything. And thus concluded the narrative. If you have perused this account in its entirety, kindly consider offering your feedback in the comments section regarding your impressions of the story. Irrespective of whether your comments are positive or negative, your input is invaluable in facilitating our ongoing improvement. Furthermore, we encourage you to bestow a like upon this content and to subscribe to our channel for access to more narratives of this nature. To conclude, I will present on screen another video that I am confident you will find engaging. A warm embrace, and until our next encounter.